It's the international break, and with no Championship club football, it's a good time to reflect upon Derby County's start to the season, talk about what's not gone right, what has gone right, and how Derby County can try and climb up that Championship table after the international break, heading in towards that Christmas period. We're nearly at that 10-game mark. Derby County have played 9 Championship matches so far this season. In comes in that old cliche of when you're around that 10-game mark, you can see how the Championship table is starting to shape up. Derby County, we find ourselves just outside the relegation zone. Probably not at the start of the season that we were all hoping for, but hopefully after this international break we can start to climb up that table. In this video I'm going to be talking about, as I mentioned, what's gone right, what Derby County can look to improve upon, and how I think Derby County will fare after this international break. Now we've got to talk about the context. Obviously last season Derby County, we survived in the Championship on the final day of the season after spending a large proportion of the season in that relegation zone. We've signed a lot of new players this summer, pretty much trying to sign a whole new team going into this new season with John Eustace as manager. And it's going to take time for these players to gel. I think it's obvious that these players haven't had a lot of time to gel together as a team, as that can be seen on the pitch. And what we have to remember as well is that a lot of these players either joined once the season had already started, or when they did join the club, they weren't fit and ready to go straight in on match day 1 away at Stoke. Now if we take a look back to that first opening day of the season away at Stoke, where unfortunately we lost 3-1. We went 1-0 up through Corey Blackett-Taylor supplying a nice cross to Carlton Morris, who steered it into the top corner of the net. But unfortunately towards the end of the game in that second half, Derby County capitulated a little bit and we ended up losing 3-1. Now what I want to focus in on is the formation, and I think this is going to be the key reason why Derby County will have an upturn in form after this international break. And I'm going to compare it to the most recent game we played in the home fixture in the 1-1 draw against Southampton. Now on the opening day away at Stoke, Derby County went with a 3-4-1-2, which meant that we had 3 centre backs with 2 wing backs, 2 in midfield, 1 in behind the 2 strikers. Now that team that Derby County played away at Stoke on the opening day is very different to how Derby County lined up in the most recent match against Southampton. You'll notice we also played a different formation against Southampton, but I think the main reason why we went with this formation on the opening day against Stoke was because of the personnel we had at that time. Now at the time, we didn't know the players that we would end up eventually signing, players such as Ben Brereton Diaz, Lewis Travis, Max Johnston. These are all players who've come into the team now and sort of solidified their first team spots. Now, away at Stoke on that opening day, we went with that formation and we continued with that formation for a portion of the opening start to the season. Now, Derby County obviously lost that game with that formation. It wasn't our best performance by any means, but to contrast that, one of our best performances so far of the season was away at Ipswich Town in that 2-2 draw, where we were unlucky not to come away with all 3 points, obviously giving away a penalty so late on in injury time and turning around a 1-goal deficit. But it was one of our best performances this season. I think I want to take a little look at why that might have happened. I think one of the main reasons for it was that we had the new signings that we knew were going to be first team regulars. As I mentioned, Max Johnston, Lewis Travis made their debuts away at Ipswich. We also had Bobby Clark in midfield, Rhian Brewster up top with Carlton Morris, and the team was building. Dion Sanderson came into a good bit of form at this point as well. And contrasted with it Stoke away, where it was more of squad players filling in that team. You know, players like Liam Thompson, Caden Jackson, Danny Bart, who are players that are more than likely to come off the bench for us rather than starting in these Championship fixtures. But away at Ipswich, we had a decently fully fit team, even though it might not be full of our best players that we now have. At the time, it was probably our full strength team and it warranted a really good performance away at Ipswich. And I think the reason this 3-4-1-2 formation worked was because the width that we had in that match worked really well. Callum Elder is reliable up and down that left hand side. He's more of a wing back overall, but Max Johnston coming in on his debut, I thought he was really solid up and down that right hand side. Now I think Max Johnston is more of a right back, but we'll get onto that later on in the video. But in that match it worked. Lewis Travis worked in that holding midfield position, breaking up the play. Ebou Adams put in a good performance. Obviously, Carlton Morris and Rhian Brewster were fantastic in that match. But something that I want to focus your attention on is that the fact we only had 2 shots on target in that game. And yes, I know we've gone away to, on paper, one of the best teams in the division in Ipswich. But we only had 2 shots on target in that match. Obviously, one of them being the penalty and the other one being Rhian Brewster's goal. Now, that was a common theme in our opening start to the season, that we lacked creativity in creating any clear-cut goal-scoring opportunities, which led to shots on target. And also, when we played away at West Brom in our only win of the season to date, in that 1-0 win at the Hawthorns, we only had one shot on target and came away with that 1-0 win. It was very much a smash and grab. When you look at, in terms of the form of the game and how it was playing out, West Brom were on top for large parts, but obviously in that second half, Andreas Weiman's good finish meant that we came away with all 3 points. But then we've seen that change a little bit recently, and I think that was down to the system and new formation that we've gone with, and the fact that John Eustace has changed it, since we do have the players now that can play in that system, and we've gone to playing a 4-2-3-1 formation. Now, we saw this 4-2-3-1 formation come into its own really against Southampton in the most recent match, and I think this is Derby County's strongest system and the strongest way that we're going to put a good run of form together, or bits of form together, after this international break to hopefully help push us further up the Championship table. And it worked really well. Now, there was a couple of reasons why for that, but we'll get on later on in the video in terms of the personnel in the system. But it meant that we weren't as stretched as a team. I think when we were opening the season with the 3 centre-backs and the 2 wing-backs, it felt like we were really stretched. You can see in the 4-2-3-1 formation that Eustace wants to play the ball through the middle a lot more, and what's key to that formation is the double pivot, them 2 holding midfielders, or double pivot, whatever you want to call it, that just sit in front of the back line and in between the main attacking midfielders. Now, we've seen John Eustace primarily go with obviously Lewis Travis and Ebou Adams, but that double pivot is so key to how we play and being able to switch the ball from defence to attack and show some real urgency when moving the ball forward. Now, I've said that 4-2-3-1 formation is the formation that I think Derby County should go forward with primarily, as I think that we put in a really good performance against Southampton, and I think after this international break we have some more favourable fixtures where we can get some decent points in. But my next point that I'm going to go on to in terms of why I think Derby County will have an upturn of form after this international break is also down to just the actual players that are going to be playing in the system. Now, I think this opening start to the season, as I mentioned, we have to be patient. These players haven't been a squad together for that long really, and the new players that have joined during the start of the season, players coming back from injury, they all need time to bed into that team, bed into Derby County and really gel as a squad. And it's been quite obvious on the pitch that they haven't gelled so far at the start to the season. I think we don't look as fluid as what we could be, and maybe what we will look like towards the back end of the season, especially when we're going forward in the attack. I've mentioned that creativity, but when we go forward in the attack, it doesn't look like the attacking players are linking up as well as what they could do. But after this international break, I think the players are going to come back rested and look a lot better in this next point in the season. Now, I mentioned that double pivot, those 2 holding midfielders that I think work really well in that 4-2-3-1 formation. And it's so key, isn't it, to our Derby County play. I mentioned the urgency that we showed against Southampton, and we created a lot more chances in that game, and I think that was genuinely down to those 2 holding midfielders being able to move the ball further and quickly up the pitch. Now, obviously we did see a change with Ebou Adams dropping to the bench and David Ozo coming in. I think that had to be done. Ebou Adams and Lewis Travis, I think, have both been struggling for form in the midfield for Derby County. It was very hot and cold in terms of their performances. I think away at Wrexham, both of them really struggled to have an impact on the game, where there was little quality in it from both teams, and Derby County went quite direct and quite wide during that game, playing balls quite long forward and high, bypassing the midfield. And when we've got the 2 double pivots who can move the ball further up the pitch with some urgency, it speeds up the game and it creates that excitement, the crowd get going, and it's so key to how we play. And I think when we saw David Ozo come into that side, he looks sharp, doesn't he? He plays those 1-2 passes which gets us further up the pitch quickly, and I think that was the balance that we needed to see. Ebou Adams, over the course of the last year and a half, has been one of Derby County's top performers. He's been one of our best players. Regularly last season he put in 8 out of 10 performances, but he was playing a role where he was the destroyer. He was breaking up the play, winning the ball back, putting in a lot of physical challenges, and I don't think in this new system he necessarily needs to play that role anymore. I don't think we rely upon someone to be a physical presence in that midfield as much. When it was very much backs against the wall last season and we were taking on a lot of heavy pressure from opposition teams, we needed that physical presence from a lot of players on the pitch, and Ebou Adams being a standout performer in doing that. But in this new system, I don't necessarily think Ebou Adams needs to play that role. And as I mentioned, his performances have been a little bit hot and cold, but I think that's down to him needing time to adapt to this new system, in the fact that he's got more time on the ball now. He can take a touch, and we're probably more asking him to take the ball off the defender's turn and play it either out wide to the fullbacks or further forward into the attacking midfielders, where that was probably a lot different from what he was being asked to do last season. I think it's good that we saw him given a little bit of a rest, because as I mentioned, over the last year and a half, he's pretty much played every game he's been fit for. He's been one of our most consistent performers, but with that, sometimes you just need a little bit of a rest when you're dipping in and out of form, and I think that was probably a key time for him to be taken to the bench instead of in the starting 11 against Southampton. Lewis Travis has obviously come in as a new signing, been made captain of the team, and I think him in a similar way, his performances have been a little bit hot and cold. I think we've seen some really good moments from Travis, such as the assist for Matt Clark's goal against Charlton, his performance away at Ipswich on his debut. But I think we've also seen him get a little bit frustrated with his own game, especially in that Charlton Athletic game, where you could see that he'd been given the ball a lot of times, but was a little bit sloppy in possession, sometimes was mistiming his challenges. And you could see on the pitch, he was getting visibly frustrated with how he was playing. But once again, it's down to these players. We just need to give them a little bit of time. We need to give them time to gel into that team, to bed into Derby County. It was massive ask to put Lewis Travis straight into the team and basically consistently play every single match since that Ipswich game. And I think we have seen flashes of what he can do, but also we've seen him dip in and out of form. But that's natural, and I think this international break has come at a really good time for Derby County just to rest up a little bit, and after the international break we're going to build some really good form. I think David Ozo coming into that midfield was key. As I mentioned, he looked sharp and able to move the ball forward, but also in saying that, he obviously wasn't fit to start the season, which meant that opening day away at Stoke we didn't have the option of playing David Ozo in that midfield, and you can understand probably why we went with that 3-4-1-2 formation. Another point in the pitch that I want to talk about is the strikers department, in the fact that it's obvious that Derby County want to play both Carlton Morris and Patrick Agyemang up front, with either one playing the 10 and one playing the number 9. I think it's just interesting to see how both players are linking up with each other, and once again, I keep repeating it, I think it just comes down to giving these players some time to gel and form a bit of a strikers partnership. Because what's interesting is, although Patrick Agyemang is the taller player, I actually would say Carlton Morris is better physically. And what I mean by that is Carlton Morris seems, whenever the ball's in the air, he's able to pluck it out of the air, chest it down, it sticks to his feet and he lays it off to a player. Patrick Agyemang, however, on the other hand, is really technically gifted with his feet. He looks really tricky when he runs at a defender. He wants to take his man on, and that generates his own chances. Now, it's just going to take time for both players to start playing off each other. I think we've sort of seen both players playing their own game at the moment, but slowly but surely we're seeing them link up a little bit better. And I go back to that most recent game against Southampton. It was a lot better. We saw Carlton Morris dropping a little bit deeper in games before that, sort of coming shorter for the ball, which his best position is inside that penalty area on the end of crosses and on the end of passes where he can finish them. He's such a clinical finisher, as I mentioned earlier in this video. But both players, it will take time to play off each other, and I think what's going to be really interesting to see is how both players use their own games to help assist each other. I think what's also key to mention, if we look to probably our best two performances before that Southampton game, obviously being West Brom away in the 1-0 win and the 2-2 draw away at Ipswich, is that in those two combined games we had 3 shots on target, and they were all 3 goals that we scored. However, in our most recent game against Southampton we had 5 shots on target, obviously only scored 1 in the 1-1 draw, but the performance levels were raised massively. I think as a fan base we were looking for that urgency to move the ball, that intensity, and just a little bit of excitement on the pitch to take risks in them attacking areas and be creative, and I think we got all of that. That first half was really entertaining. It was quite end-to-end at times. The second half looked a little bit stretched as both teams seemed to tire out, but it was a really good early indication of what this system can do and what the players can do in it as well. And it will be really interesting to see how we do when we have a fully fit squad with players such as Langas coming into the back four. How do we manage that when Dion Sanderson and Matt Clark are in such good form, but Langas is one of our standout performers last season, with Ben Brereton Diaz too. Obviously he missed out on the Southampton game with that being his parent club, but he's shown flashes of brilliance when he's been in the team away at Wrexham when he scored that fantastic goal. But we're hoping that he can build a good purple patch form that we've seen he done at Sheffield United and Blackburn Rovers. And it's really interesting to see how Derby County will go forward after this international break, but I'm hoping that we can play that same system we played against Southampton, because it had that urgency to move the ball forward. There was quick passes. Derby County took risks in attacking areas, and it was a really refreshing style of play to see, and I'm sure that will continue with that after the international break. And with players coming back from injury, I think we're going to see a really decent team start to evolve, and I'm really excited to see the sort of formations and pairings that we can see from players, like I mentioned, with that midfield duo in the double pivot with Patrick Adjumang and Colton Morris, and also with them attacking midfielders in behind the strikers and how they do. But yeah, that's how I think Derby County will do after the international break, and how we'll try and push up further away from that relegation zone in the Championship. It's just been a bit more of a sit down video today, discussing my own thoughts about how Derby County have done at the start of the season, and let me know down below how you think Derby County have done, and things that we've done well, things that we could improve on, and what we can expect after this international break. So if you have enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe, follow my social medias down below for more content from me, and I'll see you in the next one.